Okay, I
Yeah.
think I should introduce our institute, our think tank, and maybe myself as well. 2 years ago, I finished my government role. I was working as a national drug coordinator, as it's called in other parts of the world, drug czar. I was at that time in charge not only in illegal drugs issues, but also in the gambling, um, alcohol, and tobacco. From that perspective, I had 8 years of cooperation with 5 prime ministers because I was directly accountable to the prime minister. I was also very much involved in the 2016 outcome document, which was signed in New York during the UNGAS session. But at the same time, because tobacco, alcohol, and gambling is not it's not a small issue; it's much bigger issue than illegal drugs actually. So it's beginning to be a big game. The aim of the institute is to look at rational policies, as we say. We want to what we do actually at this moment. We do a lot of consultancies for different parties and different politicians. At the same times, we trying to develop different kind of policy papers, including looking at model legislations, taking it from very particular areas such as cannabis to the whole policy on tobacco and alcohol. We also do a lot of analysis and studies looking at different issues in terms of policies. Now, our main message in the policy is to look at realistic possibility. It's a dream and a wishful thinking, but not realistic to think that we will have the world of abstinence. I know that it's a nice idea. I have 2 daughters, 18 and 21, and of course this is on the table from time to time. The drinking alcohol, using cannabis, smoking, not so much gambling, but looking at social media all the time. And what we see and what we know from all the studies and all the data that we've been through last few decades, we know that minimizing harms and minimizing risks is the way forward. I think harm reduction is used to be contradictory topic. Very often on UN level, it was not allowed to speak about it, but the European Union last decade took in illegal drugs harm reduction as one of the main pillars in drugs policy, and on every single UN meeting, we are promoting this idea as the only humanistic possibility. It's not happening in the other areas such as alcohol and tobacco. And what I'm particularly concerned about that not many politicians, politics, strategies, and even looking at commission activities, looking at the issue of gambling. If we look at the different type of policy papers, it's very in terms of European Union and Commission coordination. I know there is a big try of the Commission to coordinate those topics cross sections, cross different areas. If we look at the cancer plan, if we look at regulations, taxations, etc., in terms of tobacco, it's much less happening in the area of alcohol. Nothing is actually happening in the area, or in our view, nothing is actually happening in the area of gambling. Also, if we look at the illegal drug strategies, European Commission is organizing the HDG group, Horizontal Drug Group. I used to go there every month for 8 years as a national drug coordinator. It's supposed to be high level meeting, but I think usually the only director of any department, government department, that used to come there. Usually it was subaltern civil servants, very much focused on repression. And last document for debate that I saw, last paper that or strategy paper that the Commission and the Presidency sent out for consultation was very much around repressive policies, very little about harm reduction. So European Commission has different departments, different commissions. Yes, I know there's been a lot done in terms of coordinating the issues cross sections, but at the same time, most western part of the European Union and some of the eastern part of European Union, such as Poland or Czech Republic, already integrated policies. So we say we have one strategy for addiction policy. We don't have strategy for alcohol, and different strategy on gambling, and different strategy on drugs.
Thank you very much for this introductory words. I think it was very helpful for all of us to get into the topic. Thank you for that. I maybe have to apologize for my impoliteness at the beginning because of the struggles with the Zoom. I forgot to introduce myself. So my name is Mikuláš Peksa, and I'm elected for the Czech Party to the European Parliament. I saw in that you actually invoked one question from our followers, which maybe asked should maybe asked or raised here. So I will just read it. It's from Hannah from DG Sante, from the EU Commission. And she's asking what's the difference or the division between illegal and illegal drugs.
My question is clear. Don't you think that this division between the legal and illegal drugs is a bit old-fashioned, knowing that nowadays are so many legal drugs which are basically very dangerous, so prescribed drugs which have an impact as illegal drugs, and vice versa. Also knowing that among the most common drugs is alcohol, which is legal, however has a very negative or social impact, is the worst from all the drugs known. So first question, whether this is not something which has been done in the past, and with the evolved drug scene, it's being a bit outdated. And second, your idea about the harm reduction, because this is something what we are hearing really a lot in the Commission now. And the idea actually to put all in one strategy, all the different drugs. Don't you think that, well, it's really a question. It's not, I don't try to put any opinion in it. But don't you think that indeed you have to treat it differently alcohol policy, which is actually so accepted by the society and involves so much business and so much also working places, and it's something which there is no consensus currently, at least at the EU level. There is no consensus that we should go into the let's say stricter way to reduce the consumption of alcohol in the EU. And for example, you mentioned tobacco, where there is already stronger consensus that we want to avoid basically smoking. This is the way which I'm looking now at, because for example, we know that 80% of the lung cancers is caused by tobacco, and then this way of the going into the tobacco into the harm reduction would just support another way of the smoking, which would be less harmful in case of the lung cancer. Maybe, we don't know yet, maybe, but still would promote smoking. Isn't so I would like just to see your views. How could you put together such a heterogeneous groups of different drugs into the one strategy? So that would be my questions.
Yes, I think it is outdated. Also, we have to realize that member states have changed their policies last few decades, and many of them integrated policies, and it seems that it's working better. Of course, you are very right. And thank you for all these questions. I think they are very relevant, and all the time these are the questions on the table to resolve. And it seems that we don't have the solution, but I believe we do, because we've been studying and studying and studying over the decades. Us who are, as we call in our country, addictionalists, the people who work with addiction. We know that addiction is one type of behavior, and it switches. People who, and I can put many samples, people who were in treatment of heroin addiction, come to the usual life. They don't come back to heroin, but many of them start drinking. Many of them start gambling, and vice versa. So it is much more, and of course, as we all see different approaches from our own professional background. And of course, as I said, I worked in addiction field for 30 years, and I should say I'm not only a psychotherapist, but also theologian, and I think it's a human thing. At the same time, we know that it's an illness. So how can we treat it differently? Yes, we need to look at different issues such as taxation, such as different type of regulations. Of course, there can be different type of regulations for alcohol, to different type of regulations for to tobacco, but it's always the same type of behavior. If we look at the tobacco, we know that the tobacco is so spread not because there is a promotion, and you are very right with your concern. If we look at the alternatives, we kind of are afraid that we come with the message across to the young people. Okay, this is fine. It's not as dangerous as cigarettes. So, but the studies so far show that the reasons why people start using tobacco, alcohol, have actually nothing to do with a fear of doing something less or more dangerous. Especially in the underage people, like 15-year-old. It plays a role, but a minor role. So if we want to work with behavior, it's not possible to say, okay, we rather not promote or introduce less harmful products, because it will lead to the more harmful products. For example, a colleague of mine does a lot of work around alcohol in schools, and what he does, he comes with the 15, 16-year-old across to the young people with harm reduction message. He knows young people will drink. We all know that young people will try. Most of the people in Czech Republic, 95% of younger than 15 have experienced already drinking, most commonly in their family. We know that 30% of young people have under 16 have experienced drunkenness already. It's a high number. So he said his program is called "Let's Talk About Alcohol." So it's the same thing. Let's talk about drugs. Let's talk about tobacco. I mean, it's there. There are these risks, and we have to speak about these risks, and we have to bring the preventative message. At the same time, it's our duty, I believe, it's our duty to as realistic policymakers to promote to distinguish. For example, I talk of the example of the gambling issues. We have now growing industry on online gambling, and even lotteries can become dangerous. Before it was not a big risk, very minute risk. Less than 1% of people could say that they would have some symptoms of gambling by taking by playing lotteries. But now it's growing because of the online gambling. So, but at the same time, lotteries overly are sorry for being very broad. I want to show this different examples. So it all works the same: tobacco, illegal drugs, alcohol, gambling. So we know that when we look at we try to distinguish the differences, that lotteries are the least harmful. So should the taxation be less? Should the policy actually support the less harmful against the more harmful? Or should we say, okay, gambling is bad? Same as smoking. We have to come with across to the young people with harm reduction message, as well as with the abstinence message, of course, yes. So yes, some kind of a consensus we should find. And I think harm reduction is actually can be the unification possibility, how to start, where to start from, because of course we cannot pretend that we live in the world of civil servants. No, we live in the world of, yes, civil servants, then voters, and very strong lobbies which have a lot of money to lobby in a very, very clever way. And so what can we do? I think the only option is to say, okay, let's support as much as possible any type of policy, any type of approach, any type of soft or legislative instrument that would be geared to minimizing harms and risks. Sorry, I was very long with my answer.
Thank you very much for the answer. It's definitely not easy to help lecture while being under this crazy COVID thing.
Yeah. Got a headache.
You are really staying it bravely, but maybe we will not torch you further. There is another question from Hannah, but maybe as the time is running, we will leave the space for our further guests, who are Kasia Kowalczyk and David McIntosh from Global Public Health Network. So, gladly welcome here, you, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for having us here. Let me just provide you with some more facts on why harm reduction could and horizontal approaches could and should be applied into public health. So as it was said, my name is Katarzyna Kowalczyk and I'm representing Global Public Health Network, the network that supports pragmatic and effective solutions to public health. And I'm here with David McIntosh, who has over 20 years of experience in drug and alcohol policy and delivery at different levels, including national within the UK. The third thing is harm reduction works best through horizontal approach. It was said that problems in public health, in general, problems rarely occur in silos. So in order to tackle them effectively, they require a breadth range of solutions involving all of the relevant parties. So that is why we support collaborative solutions. That is why we support multidisciplinary partnerships, of course, rooted in those who are at risk. Dave?
Okay, thank you. And let me add my thanks for this opportunity. I'm going to speak a little bit more about harm reduction, and we've already heard speakers talk about its success, but it would be fair to say that despite the visible and evident success of harm reduction, particularly when we look at it in the world of drugs, and particularly to do with heroin addiction, it's not exactly seen as being a vote winner. And it would be fair to say that with a few honourable exceptions, harm reduction as a concept hasn't enjoyed a lot of political support. I guess currently it's difficult, and particularly given one of our speakers is afflicted, it's difficult not to reference the COVID pandemic. And I guess when we're thinking about that broader example of harm reduction, we can think about face masks and hand washing. These reduce the risk, they reduce harm, but they don't guarantee that you're not going to catch the virus. But harm reduction does, if you like, make a strong case in a time when health services are under great pressure, because they work very well for the most vulnerable members of our community. And if we can help reduce the number of citizens who require ambulances or hospital admission due to alcohol or drugs or other issues, then that takes a lot of pressure off acute health services. But there's also some key principles of harm reduction, which I think a lot of countries, including the UK, could use to inform some of its COVID-specific responses. And that includes things like risk communication. Because harm reduction is about working with people in the situation that they're in, there's a focus on what's relevant and what's accessible, and making sure that people understand what the risk is they're facing and how it can be mitigated, so that there's something practical they can do. So harm reduction goals should be clear, they should be achievable. And harm reduction really, I think, works best when it acknowledges the target group or community as being part of the solution. They're not just a problem, they can help you achieve your goals. Now, harm reduction approaches have shown themselves to be highly adaptable and highly responsible to new challenges. And I think, again, the COVID pandemic's given us examples of this. Across Europe, one of the areas where there was a lot of response was to homeless street populations. And across Europe, tens of thousands of people have been taken off the streets and moved into accommodation and helped be kept safe. Now in London, the Greater London Authority has worked with Public Health England, National Health Trusts, drug treatment NGOs and charities who provide services to rough sleepers. And we've put about 1,400 people who were sleeping on the streets into hotels. The hotels were emptied because of the pandemic, and actually local authorities have found another 1,000 beds in London. Now these people were given direct and immediate access to a range of health services, including substitute prescribing for those who had opiate problems. There's been mental health support. But there's also been things like naloxone's been provided so that where people are being prescribed methadone, we can mitigate the risk of overdose. And around 85% of this group smoke, which is a big problem in hotels which have no smoking policies. So safer alternatives have been provided. These have included vaping devices, nicotine sprays, and nicotine pouches. And training's been provided on how the individuals can use them, but also to the hotel staff, so they understand how these products can be used, and indeed, in some cases, how naloxone could be administered if someone was overdosing. And they've also been educated to understand why actually for some of them who are alcohol dependent, access to alcohol has been important. Now, other cities in the UK and across Europe have provided very similar responses, and this has provided a really good example of that sort of horizontal approach, because it's only been possible through all the charities, NGOs, civic authorities, health providers, the police, and other agencies working together, but it's also needed the engagement of those homeless populations who've seen that their needs are being considered. And I can say it will be years while we write all this up, but engagement from individuals has been overwhelmingly positive. And it really does show what can be achieved when we have to collaborate, and when services match the need, and when services show people that they are going to meet their requirements. And Kash has got another example from Poland.
Hello. Maybe there are some questions, but I would rather postpone it to the end of the lectures and give the word to our last guest, the Most Honorable Baroness Matcher, member of the House of Lords of the United Kingdom, who just connected to us and will introduce her contribution called Better Policy for Health of Disadvantaged Groups. So, stage is yours.
Hello, everybody. Jendrik asked if I would introduce myself. So very briefly, perhaps I should explain that I became interested in the drug, how can you put it, drug policy issue when I was a chair of a mental health trust in East London. We ran hospitals and other facilities, about 56 different sites for people with severe mental health problems. I found out that most of our patients took cannabis. They were also, of course, on strong antipsychotic medications. And I asked them, why do you take cannabis? Surely it's messing up your treatment. And they would reply, because it makes me feel human. Yes, it may increase my voices, but it's worth it. I feel so much better if I have cannabis. So shortly after that, I was appointed a peer in the House of Lords, and I decided that I would see what I could do at the policy level about the fact that these drugs are across the piece illegal. And very quickly, I found myself as chair of the parliamentary group for drug policy reform. And for 14 years, I have done my little bit in this area. So that's enough about me. Addiction is a miserable affliction. As rock star Peter Doherty, who was addicted to heroin and crack, said, I would not wish my addiction on my worst enemy. He knew perfectly well what an absolutely agonizing affliction addiction is. And as they say, once an addict, always an addict. And it's very clear to me that the only response to addiction is to reduce the harms, if at all possible, harms for the individual, harms for the family, harms for the community, in any way that one can. And the problem I think we all have is, of course, the answer is not uniform, it's different for each and every, well, not literally every individual, but one size just doesn't fit all at all. And governments seem to find this an extremely difficult idea to get their heads around. They seem to think, punish everybody and you'll solve the problem. So we've somehow or another got to get across to governments that a variety of approaches is what this is all about. So I suppose the first question that I feel we all have to be very clear about, and I'm sure most people involved in this discussion are very clear about it, can addiction be effectively treated? And I think David was intimating, of course, that some can achieve abstinence through the 12-step program, highly structured process for rebuilding their lives and maybe making amends to people they've harmed through their addiction. But I always feel this approach probably works best for people who anyway can believe in a sort of higher power that will help and support them. And I do believe in this day and age that that group are a minority. So I don't think that system works for more than that minority. Of course, CBT is very helpful in helping people to deal with triggers and deal with stresses that might have caused them to relapse in the past. Possibly with CBT, they can keep on the road, if you like, some kind of steady road through harm reduction strategies. So I have focused on harm reduction in relation to drugs, but of course the same principles apply absolutely equally to, in my view, to gambling, tobacco, and to alcohol. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your speech. Maybe we have some questions now from our followers. I think there was a question I have earlier postponed and promised to be answered by Mrs. Horka from the DG Santes. So now is the time to ask if you want.
I still see that in my opinion, I still see that there is no possible to put together things like a heroin addiction with tobacco and with alcohol, because while I certainly agree that there is a need to do harm reduction policies in drugs such as heroin and so on. We need to have these balanced policies to provide help, because as it has been already said, it's mainly illness. It's addiction is illness, so there needs to be a network to help. And I very much like the link between the mental health and addiction, and how we need to provide people with such a problems, first of all, the social and psychological help. I simply think that, of course, heroin is not publicized in the TV. You cannot buy it around the schools, at least you shouldn't. Or formally in a kiosk or in the tobacco shops. You cannot have a... So what I'm trying to say is that we can afford to have a harm reduction for the illegal drugs, because simply there is already done the strict legislation. But when we are talking about this in alcohol, we are only trying to save the consequences by this harm reduction, alcohol and tobacco, because simply when we have a huge marketing, when we have when beer is more accessible than water in pubs and restaurants, when we see that it's simply everywhere. That's not the same case when we are talking about heroin problems. So first we need also to balance this side, and then to speak about the harm reduction. So I'm going to the point when we are always saying that actually the most effective is so-called WHO best buys, and that's about the reduction of availability, marketing, and rising the pricing policies, rising the taxation. So that's actually the most effective way to have a, educational programs at schools. That's nice, but in order to be effective, that needs to be really well done, because of course everybody knows that smoking is not healthy, and maybe not so well known that alcohol can cause cancer, but for young people this has no really meaning, because they see it all around. So why everybody does it, why not them? The death is for them a long time ahead of them. So I'm still not persuaded that we should really put together the drugs, and meaning the drugs as heroin and so on, and the common drugs, alcohol, tobacco, and so on. Thanks.
Yes, I think it is not disconnected from the whole debate and from all the panelists said here, because we talk about alcohol situation, gambling, and methadone prescribing, and all kind of type of policies in drugs. As I mentioned at the beginning, not taking very much now into consideration a debate about why all the countries such as Germany, Portugal, Czech Republic, Poland integrated policies. That would we would have to talk very much into details and have maybe another seminar on it. So we just wanted to open the debate. But if I may, to put it, to take into consideration, as I said, addiction behavior is one. Alcohol, tobacco, heroin, gambling, it interacts. It's not a separated behavior. So if we want to really tackle the risky behavior, especially of young people, how can we come with policies that are separated? That's a very difficult job to do or task to do, and we are not successful in it. What was successful actually in the illegal drugs was enough treatment and, as we call, low threshold approach to people who are stigmatized on the streets using heroin, to be able to come as humans, to be treated as people. Well, we see the differences with alcohol, and we think it's a different policy. But at the same time, if we look at the WHO, and then we switch to the legal policies, legal drugs policies, we see the same pattern actually. The most harms often are done by unrealistic expectations and policies. The idea of we will have a world without tobacco by 2030, is it going to happen? I don't think so. Now, what can we do for young people to progress faster? We know that, yes, WHO recommendations, higher taxation, restrictions worked in terms of stopping the epidemic, and it helped 1 or 2% to come down, no more. It's small number, but we look at the harm reduction spontaneous policy that happened in US, for example, or in Sweden in terms of tobacco, and it reduced harms by tens of percents, even 80%. It's so big, we cannot ignore it. I know it's difficult to say, okay, as you said previously, do we promote smoking? No, we don't promote smoking. None of us wants our children to smoke. I don't smoke. I don't smoke cigarettes, tobacco. I don't even drink. But and I don't want my kids to do it. But at the same time, I have to be realistic. So if there is a safer option, we need to promote it because it's a harm reduction, realistic policy. I think whether it is heroin, for example, what we've been talking about for many years, and the Estonian example that I put previously, where the harsher policies actually develop, at some point it breaks and it develops more harms because there is a threshold, and if you exceed it, then all the sociologists, politologists, economists will tell you there is this much that people can take, and then it gets worse. So any prohibitionist idea is usually not working. And with the tobacco, we're not far from prohibitionist ideas. We have the end game idea that now that it's really promoting things like or say in the latest papers, I was shocked looking at the latest paper of some of the end game people saying the evidence policy don't work. This is contradiction. Evidence policy don't work. We need to introduce some charismatic vision, and they came with more stricter rules. When we know that, and I believe that we cannot say that Swedish government is biased. I think I would. We know that in Sweden the smoking drops so rapidly, and the harms of smoking drop so rapidly because the ice hockey icon started taking the snooze.
Could I jump in there? I mean, there's two things there, and as a former recovering civil servant, I can feel Hannah's pain a little bit in terms of the structures and things. But if I think about my involvement in a alcohol and drug service in East London, it would not be unusual. The first time we'd see someone that'd come in with a drug problem, we'd see the same person 2 years later had often developed an alcohol. They'd have a drug problem, then an alcohol problem. And then actually we developed a gambling service later on, and we'd see the same people back there.
Yeah.
And it was very belatedly that we actually thought we could do anything about their smoking. And that was one of the things that actually all of them really enjoyed help with about their smoking, because it was immediate, it was something they could do, and it immediately helped put money in their pocket. But I do think on the WHO thing, I think it's very partial. I think it works for some of the population. If I think in the UK, smoking is overwhelmingly concentrated in the poorest parts of the population. I don't think taxation and making it ever more unaffordable is actually doing a lot there. And it's also massively worsened health inequalities within the UK, because actually the middle classes don't smoke now, the poorer groups do.
But what we, sorry, I can interrupt you. What we say, yes, let's think of the taxation. Let's put higher taxation on cigarettes. Let's not put excise tax, at least for some time, on some of the alternatives, for example. And the other thing, if you look and I want to answer the why should we integrate. So there are two things. One, we have a lot of possible strategies introducing less harmful products and make them legal in currently illegal drug world. If we look at some data, how many people switched from alcohol to cannabis in some countries where people have access to cannabis, or some countries switch from there and back from, for example, opium tinctures to which are much less harmful. People can work, people don't die of overdose, to heroin. So I know it's very difficult to think about it because we have now the idea that it has to be illegal and that's it for the end of our lives. But I think if we look at the evidence, we have to at least consider. The other thing is, well, I'm coming back to the beginning of what I said, and what David also said. most helpful policies actually are treatment, help. These are governments put less money in treatment and help, even including tobacco counseling, for example, than any other policies. And sorry, you need to go voting.
Sorry, yes, sorry.
You need to go voting.
So good luck with the vote. And thank you for your contribution and being with us. It was very, very, we are very grateful for that.
So I just finished the sentence. So we have to kind of broaden up and look at the evidence, learn from each other. I think some policies that we introduced in the illegal drugs world are very helpful, and among those which are the help services, helping services actually. The soft kind of instruments are often in the and that includes all the other areas. I mean, we can put number of restrictions on gambling, and we did in our country, and I was pro it, and we prepared a law to strictly reduce the number of casinos and land-based machines. We had more land-based machines in Czech Republic per head than in LA. But okay, we reduced it, but the problem doesn't disappear, of course. And I kept saying from the very beginning, if you just do regulations, it will work this much. But you need to introduce help, and that is cross-section. And it's, if we look at alcohol or gambling or heroin, it's the same approach.
You know, I fully,
some little strategies different, but and what we do in Czech strategy, for example, currently, because I was behind the in the Czech Republic behind the integrating policies. Yes, we have different kind of looking at the taxation of tobacco, taxation of alcohol, but it's still one phenomenon. Sorry, I'm long.
Yeah, I fully agree that basically I don't try to suggest that by taxation, availability, and so on, we will solve the problem. So it needs to be both, for sure. Yeah. And I'm not at all suggesting that we should be only on these restrictive measures. Of course, as I said, I consider it as a addiction, and that basically, of course, treatment is needed, psychological support, cognitive behavior therapy. I fully agree, and all those support programs, those which are vulnerable, which are on the streets, certainly yes, that's without any discussion. So I don't think that there is any disagreement about this in the Commission. I'm just against I'm I don't think that I'm against anything, but to suggest that basically this is the way which we should go, for example, in tobacco and alcohol, and that we should not at all do these restrictive measures, because basically speaking about, and there I see the division between the legal and illegal drugs, because we don't do a marketing of the illegal drugs simply. But if something is becoming a normality for people, so then it's like a very, then indeed only the treatment or only solving the impact of such a addictions, that's not solution. We should also prevent it, and the prevention is in many cases reduction of the availability and rising the prices. I also understand, what has been said, that that in the health inequalities, actually, that tobacco is strongly linked with the inequity, and that basically there is this strong socioeconomic status. But vaping is not solution for those people. So if you have simply, if you are living in the poor suburb in London, while giving you, instead of the cigarettes, the e-cigarette, this is simply not solution to your problem. So this is not the way.
I mean, there are not only, you don't need to vape. There is, for example, snus, so smokeless tobacco product. What else do you, if someone is a smoker, making him not smoking is a very difficult thing. So what we could do, and there is some amount of population that will never quit on smoking because they can't, or because they even don't want to. So what would you suggest? Like banning all the cigarettes? Like the question is, is it realistic? That's the point.
I think we are at the core of the debate. I think it's quite important. Does harm reduction actually work for people or not? I agree. Regulations are a help. When we had totally free market with cigarettes and alcohol, it was a disaster. When we had prohibition with alcohol and we have prohibition with drugs, it's a big disaster. The same, no difference. So we need to find something in between. So yes, let's have restrictions, but let's also bring the harm reduction approach for many people, and for young people. Is better to use snus than I don't want my daughters to use anything, but if I have to choose, nicotine is as dangerous, and not less but not more than caffeine. Okay, I don't drink coffee, for example, because I think coffee is too addictive and it gives me headache and stomachache. I just don't want to drink coffee. The only drug I use is green tea. So I am very abstinence oriented, but at the same time, working with people for 30 years, I think we have this idea that we can resolve it from the policy position. We cannot. People are people. We know, for example, that 2 to 3% of the population have something that we, of course, it's a theory that we debate, that have something that we call addictive personality. Whatever you do, whatever prevention you do, they will fall into addictive behavior at some point in their life, and and usually similarly to schizophrenia, for example, which usually develops around the age of 16, 17, 18, 19, often with the hormonal changes. The addiction situation or personality comes out at the same time. So whatever prevention we do there usually is not working. What we can do is from the very beginning have some options of minimizing harms. When we say harm reduction, it sounds, the word is maybe let's reframe it: minimizing harms and risks. So of course, reduced availability. I would like to see certain illegal drugs to have similar or even maybe stricter rules as we have with tobacco, for example, and that would work with people. Cannabis, MDMA, maybe opium tinctures. It would dramatically reduce, if we have available MDMA, it would dramatically reduce number of people using amphetamines. If we have opium tinctures, it would dramatically reduce the number of people, and it happened in different parts of the world, and we have all evidence for decades that shows that would dramatically reduce a number of people who use heroin. Same with nicotine. But of course, I have to admit myself, I am a liberalist. So in my view, we don't work well so much with addictions at the end of the day, because we have many addictions: caffeine, sugar, sex, I don't know, unless it really seriously harms the people and creates a trouble for public budget, etc. So I mean, in terms of nicotine, if you have pure nicotine, we have it in pharmacies, public marketed. So what's the difference? I don't see the difference. It does. Sorry to be very strong on that. I totally understand, Sana, your concerns, and they are very relevant concerns. But this debate has been here before for many decades, even with the drugs, and I think it's kind of let's say inhumane from our perspective, people who work with addictions and people who have the addictive behavior problem, to say, okay, we have a less harmful possibility, but let's focus on abstinence and let's rather not promote it. And okay, it will small number of people it works, and some other number of people it will actually harm. So I think people should make, I mean, as a liberalist, I believe people should be able to be adult. We should introduce options, and okay, if there is a less or more risky substance, the regulations should be different. Whether it is cannabis or heroin, whether it is cigarettes or e-cigarettes or snus, etc. Yes, whether it is lotteries or so. This is how I think this is why we think harm reduction is the uniting. Sorry, I said one sentence and I'm long again. It's a uniting issue where we should start from. And on the other hand, on one hand, we believe that harm reduction is very useful as a strategy for people who use heroin, and then we say it's not useful and we don't want it in tobacco or alcohol, for example, which we also use it in alcohol. But we don't have time to talk about it. So I think this is discrepancies from our point of view, people who work with this area for many years, and I was on both sides, treatment and help and policy. So in my head, it took many years to understand it should be integrated, and we should look at it not as addiction the only trouble. It is the harms that we're looking at.
That was really interesting discussion. It reminded me some discussions we have had. It's maybe a little bit different topic when we discussed in the Committee of Foreign Affairs situation in the Central Middle East and especially Afghanistan. I think there was a lot of discussion about how to stabilize the country and so on and so on. And at the end, we concluded, well, there is a huge production of chemicals that are now then heading to a European market. Why is it going there? Because there is a demand for such chemicals in Europe. And yeah, of course, you should not have an opportunity to buy this or that behind or close to school, but it's actually happening. And because it's happening illegal, there are a lot of like profits from this type of criminal activity, resulting at the end to financing of various organizations we want to defeat. And I think we sacrificed a lot of resources, a lot of lives actually, even in this war. And at the end of the day, we are not successful just because we are not really taking into account that people are people, and they will buy it if there is someone producing it, and then someone is producing that. So yeah, I think it is quite complicated discussion, and I was happy to have the opportunity to have it. I seen actually no other raised hands in the audience, so maybe like we can conclude that yeah, many people through the world are unable or unwilling to stop using drugs. Abstinence is definitely an individual choice, but this should not be regarded as the only available option. And yeah, I'm happy we have discussed this harm reduction, because dismissing the negative impact associated with the substance and use simply cause further problems in the field of human rights and so on. And especially, like, thanks for this discussion on the problems with cancer, because in the context of EU cancer plan, it is something quite important we should point out. So once again, I would like to thank our guests. In the order of the contributions, it was Jindřich Bobořil, Kateřina Kovalčík, David McIntosh, and Molly Matcher. And thank you all for following us. And I hope we will have as soon as possible an opportunity or another opportunity to meet together with Institute for Rational Addiction Policies and the European Pirates. Thank you all.